And we are now live.
Okay, this is Senate Appropriations, and our first item regarding the budget adjustment is a request on the Burlington school expenditure related to the situation, the public health problem that they're having with the need to move the school from one building into a temporary site. So Nathan, welcome. We haven't seen you for quite a while. And Bill, thank you. So if you would give us some background, obviously what's happening at the school has been the topic of a lot of news coverage and, the selection of an alternative site. So if you would give us some background and the origin of the request and the amount of the request and exactly what would be how these funds would be utilized. So since it's going to go through Agency of Education, maybe we should start with you, Bill, in terms of what the agency is requesting here.
Thank you for having us, and pleasure to be here. For the record, Bill Bates, Agency of Education. And as you can see from the BAA Budget Adjustment Act spreadsheet that you have, the specific ask is $3.5 million, and that is $3.5 million of the SEA, state level funds that we would like to appropriate for the use of fit up costs at the old Macy's building. And I'll let Nathan provide some background material as far as what makes that up, and then the length of the lease term.
Okay, thank you. So your request is 3.5 million in the ESSER. Is it ESSER?
ESSER set aside, yes.
Okay, so we're talking about allocation of federal funds that have come to the state.
That is correct. So we are going to receive $126 million, of which 90% of that will go to the field, which leaves approximately $12 million at the agency. And it is that a portion of that $12 million, 3.5, that we are asking to use for these fit up costs.
Okay, thank you. Nathan, welcome. Good to see you.
Hey, thanks. It's nice to be back. Although I wish the circumstances were a little different, but I appreciate the opportunity to describe this the need and Senator Kitchell, as you mentioned, I think there has been a lot of news coverage, so I'll be brief, but I can dive into more details where necessary. But in short, the Burlington High School students have been displaced and have not been able to attend any in-person instruction since PCBs were airborne PCB levels were determined to be above the Vermont Health Department's screening value. And so virtually no in-person instruction has occurred at all this school year for those students. And when that obviously comes on the heels, like every other school in Vermont, of going remote in the middle of March last year. So we are getting perilously close to a year without any in-person instruction for high school students. We wanted to move as quickly as possible to identify a space where that could happen. At the same time, it's not in some ways surprising that we're almost, at this point into late January, because it's pretty hard to move an entire high school. We looked for spaces both in Burlington and in some of our neighboring communities to figure out where we could land this thing, or even whether or not we could use multiple spaces. And we ultimately arrived at the most feasible option being to utilize the former home of Macy's in downtown Burlington. There's a lot of advantages to that space, but there are some disadvantages to that space and all spaces. And one of the big ones is you need to transform what was largely a wide open floor plan into classrooms and other instructional spaces that are necessary. And the approximate cost of doing that work is about $3.5 million. So that's the support that we reached out to our legislative delegation. We had great conversations with them, as well as with the governor's office and the governor specifically and his team. And so we were thrilled when there was an idea here and to put forth the $3.5 million. And I think as a former member of your joint fiscal office team, I recognize the benefit of being able to tap into the federal funds to do this work as opposed to the state general fund. So we're really optimistic about that as well. For Burlington, the total cost of moving into Macy's is not just the fit up cost, right? We're going to be paying rent and utilities and so forth for the next 3.5 years. So when I talk about the total cost of moving to Macy's, roughly we're looking at about $10 million, of which this is the $3.5 million that we would put to the fit up cost. And one of the key reasons why we're looking to have this happen and why the budget adjustment is a great kind of timing wise would work for us is because we're going to owe this first $3.5 million when this fit up is complete, which will hopefully happen toward the end of February. Our goal is to have students back in person after the town meeting break in March. So we're going to owe about $3.5 million to the owner who will have paid for all of this work at that time. And if we were not to be able to make that payment upfront, then the result would be that instead of paying it upfront, we would pay it back incrementally over the term of the lease. So every month we would pay a little bit extra. The owner, of course, would be borrowing money to pay all the contractors and the subcontractors who did this work. So in essence, we would be paying back not only the borrowing, the actual loan amount that the owner would be taking, but also their interest cost. And so instead of paying roughly $3.5 million for the fit up, if we spread that cost out over the entire term of the loan, we would probably end up paying closer to $4.5 million, about $4.4 million. So there's a real benefit to being able to pay this off upfront, in addition to obviously being able to use federal dollars for it. So that's the kind of situation right now. One other thing I just want to make really clear to people is this does not solve our long-term PCB issue. We are still investigating the depth of that, of what would be required to reduce the indoor air concentrations of PCBs at the high school and allow students and staff to move back in there for full-time instruction. But this buys us time, and it buys us time at the right time because we do have a significant project envisioned for the high school space. We with a lot of fanfare, we passed a $70 million construction bond just a couple of years ago. It's the beginning phases of that project where this was discovered. So the one silver lining in all this, frankly, is that we are able to make use of the Macy's space that not only allows a return to in-person instruction in a place where we don't have concerns about indoor air quality, but it also gives us an ability to, once we're ready, to continue that high school renovation project, because we would have needed to move students out of the building to some other location eventually. But we were going to try to do a more complicated phasing. And this, in some ways, this allows us to simplify it and just say, they're not going to be there for the next couple of years. The work can happen, all year long.
Okay. So it's anticipated that the students would be in this renovated space. Did you say 3 years?
3.5 years is the lease term that we've been discussing, the half year being the rest of this current year. So kind of from now through June, and then the 3 subsequent years. We do have an option to extend our stay there in the lease. Obviously that would incur additional annual costs for us, but and if we are in a position to not need to move back into our high school before the end of the 3.5 years, we have a plan to utilize the space as kind of swing space for some of the other projects in our other schools that we have slated, and we need space to kind of displace students temporarily to do those. So it's a 3.5 year lease from this point.
Okay. Questions of Nathan or Bill? Yes, Bobby.
Yes, I don't know. I think, Nathan, this would be for you. If you were planning on relocating some while the construction was going on, is that savings figured in to this $3.5 million that you're asking for?
Yeah, good question. So if none of this had happened, and if we were going to try to do the project with students there would have had to been some displacement of students. However, what we would have done, and it's kind of a complicated phasing, is we would have essentially done construction with students and staff on site, which, as you can imagine, requires extra safety precautions, is slower and ultimately costs more. and we would have moved the students from some of the old unrenovated spaces to some of the newly constructed spaces to then allow us to go back in and renovate the old spaces. So we would have kind of cycled them through the property. We are hopeful that by moving to completely out of the building, that will be able to accelerate the project timeline and generate some savings for the project as a whole. The contractors haven't been able to and the architects have not been able to kind of quantify that and guarantee. I think intuitively it'll happen. However, at the same time, we are also experiencing potential new pressures in costs. There are prices, for example, of steel is going up quite rapidly at the moment. So we're also in that kind of box where the longer we wait, even though we need to wait to understand the full extent of the PCB problem, the longer we wait, the more it costs us. So I think there will be some savings, but they're not quantifiable and at this time. And if there are savings, the best case scenario there is probably just going to be that it'll help us stay within our $70 million project budget for the new high school.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator Baruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Nate and Bill. I really appreciate your long hours on this. I know you've been working very hard on it, and the administration has been wonderful to work with. I did want to alert the committee. I think there's a tendency maybe to say, well, this is a Burlington problem, but if you pull back from it just a little bit, it is a state of Vermont problem, and Burlington is the canary in the coal mine, because most of our school buildings were constructed circa the same time period. And the issue here is that the common construction materials, especially around glazing, windows, that sort of thing, those are in use in a lot of different school buildings. So when you think about impact to the state, this is $3.5 million to begin to deal with this now, but Burlington will not be the last Vermont school building that discovers PCBs. So I know we have the Vice Chair of Natural Resources with us today, Senator Westman. So I just want to reiterate and ask that I made of the Chair of Natural Resources, which is that committee review the state's PCB standards, because part of the problem is the delta between the state standards and the federal standards. Our standards are much stricter, and so there are major portions of the high school that pass federal standard but fail the strict state standard. So one of the things I asked Senator Bray was whether the Natural Resources Committee could do a review of those standards, determine, are they too strict? Are they what they should be? But that's information that we need to know to avoid these kind of expenses statewide potentially over the next decades.
Is this sort of a debate that we had reminiscent with the lead standard?
Yes, and radon, exactly.
Okay. Senator Sears?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, Senator Baruth's comment. I think I certainly learned a great lesson a few years back when my neighbors' properties and mine were in wells. My neighbors, I don't have a well, were contaminated by a product that we never expected, basically. And so I think it is a statewide problem. Anytime you have pollution in one area of the state, you can't rely on that community or that city to fix it. It is a national problem, it's a state problem. And as we've seen from Flint, Michigan, when you ignore things or try to say there's not a problem, I don't know about the standards, and that's certainly up to the Natural Resources Committee and others, but I think as far as this particular project and making sure that kids can go to high school in a safe place, it's important that we look at it as a statewide problem.
I was thinking it would remind you of the PFOA and the extent to
Certainly
which
did.
the Bennington need got recognized as, because it could happen in any area
Absolutely.
of the state. Yeah. So other questions?
But I will just add that it's important that we pass legislation to make polluters accountable.
Senator Ballen, did you have your hand up or?
My internet just quit out during that last thing that Senator Sears said. And I'm wondering if he could just repeat
What to
it.
hold polluters accountable.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other comments? I know that you've been in House Appropriations and have made this same presentation. I at least what I've had for feedback is it was favorably viewed in terms of something to include in the budget adjustment. As you say, the timeline here, because of trying to get it done before March town meeting so students can go back, a year without in-person learning is, boy, a long haul. And it's kind of nice that we have some federal money here to help us with this particular, it's really a public health issue. So other comments? Okay. Then I think from the Agency of Education, this is the only budget adjustment request that you have, Bill?
That is correct. And if I could just highlight for the committee, we would like to recommend a technical change. And so currently this BAA has this under B500, which is Finance and Administration. And we feel that it should have been put in B501, which is Ed Services. And so if we could just make note of that.
All right, well, we have joint fist. Stephanie is listening, so
Yeah,
if
and that's, I
that's
think
the
we already
right,
corrected on the House side.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you.
okay, so we don't even need to worry about it, Stephanie. Other comments or requests?
Not for
How
me.
many students are attending Burlington High School?
Yeah, there's current enrollment is around 930, 940 students.
Okay. It's a lot of students to get coordinated.
Absolutely.
Yes, Senator Starr.
Well, I just think that this is a very, very important issue. And I mean, it's sinful that those students are missing out on in-school learning. And it's gonna probably harm those students a great deal. And the quicker we as a state can resolve this and get them back in the classrooms and get them back to learning, I think the better our state will be. And certainly Chittenden County will help them some. And I just think that it's very important it's too bad we couldn't have put this in that fast track bill that we just done, but I guess it'll still be timely to be able to pay the contractor.
Yeah, I think the BAA is going to be quite a skinny bill coming over from the House. So I think we can turn it around pretty quickly. Other questions or comments? Otherwise, we can let you go back to your regular work at hand. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Take
So-
care, everyone. Be well.
Thank
You're all
you.
looking good.
What happened to your hair, Nathan?
Hey, I'm trying the Dick Sears look on.
All right, committee, it's only 22 after 1 and our next scheduled witnesses aren't available until 2. So do we want to just take a break?
Well, I would think we'd just short their budget, for a bunch of dollars, seeing they can't possibly be with us, and adjourn for the afternoon.
Apparently they weren't, we weren't at the top of the dance car, Senator Starr. So
No,
Chrissy, do you take us offline and then we come back, or how do you want us to handle the break?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop live stream.
Uh-huh.
So if you guys, so right now I'm going to stop live stream and we'll just.
If you would, please.
You're going to
Uh-huh.
reconvene at